So the Easter Island, these enormous statues, one of the things they found, in I don't know when they started doing this, they dug deeper and deeper and deeper and found out that the heads that are above the surface are just a tiny part of it.
You don't realize that they're really buried right up to their chest, and that these statues are 2 or 3 times as large as we can see, because most of them is below ground.
When scientists used AI to scan Easter Island's Moai statues, they expected simple images of buried stone. Instead, the data exposed something vast beneath the island, patterns and structures that defied everything they understood about the site. What the AI uncovered in the final scans sent waves of panic through the research team. Because it wasn't just about the past. It was a warning meant for everyone alive today.
They represent the deified ancestors of today's islanders. They're part of a Polynesian tradition of honoring your ancestors.
The Island of Giants. No place on Earth feels quite like Easter Island. It lies in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, more than 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continent. To reach it, a plane must cross hour after hour of open sea with nothing in sight but endless blue water. Then, out of nowhere, the island comes into view, a small triangle of dark volcanic rock breaking through the waves, surrounded by nothing but horizon. Travelers say that when they step onto its soil, the first thing they feel is not the wind or the heat, but a strange heaviness in the air, as if the island itself is aware of their presence. All across this lonely land stand the Moai statues. Nearly 900 of them are scattered across the island, facing inland as though guarding something. Each one has a long face, heavy brows, and a calm expression that feels neither kind nor cruel. Some are over 10 meters tall, and many weigh more than 70 tons. They were carved from volcanic tuff, a soft stone that hardens with age, giving them their rough, weathered surface. Most of the statues stand on raised stone platforms called ahu, but dozens are half buried, their heads and shoulders jutting from the ground as if they are slowly being swallowed by the earth. The locals call them Aringa Ora Otetupuna, the living faces of the ancestors, but they are also known by another name whispered quietly among the elders, the Watchers. For generations, the Rapa Nui people have treated these statues with a mix of pride and fear. They are living monuments of power, carved to hold the spirit of the ancestors. The islanders believe they protect the land, but they also say the statues can curse anyone who disrespects them. Elders still tell children not to climb on the Moai or take stones from near their platforms. Archaeologists laugh off these warnings, yet even they admit that something about the island feels unsettling. In recent years, scientists have begun to notice changes that have renewed those old fears. Local residents claimed that some of the Moai appeared to have shifted slightly in position. Visitors took photos months apart and swore that the angles of the statues' shadows had changed. To the eye, it seemed as if a few of the figures had turned or leaned, but no major earthquakes or landslides had been recorded. The reports eventually reached a consortium of research institutes that study seismic stability and ancient structures. The scientists were divided on what to think. Some suspected that underground erosion caused by trapped groundwater was shifting the soil, while others blamed natural volcanic activity deep below the island. A few even wondered if chemical weathering of the rock could be altering its density. None of these explanations fully accounted for what was being recorded. To investigate, the consortium approved a proposal to map the subsurface of the island in unprecedented detail. The project would use an artificial intelligence system capable of combining radar tomography, seismic mapping, and deep learning pattern recognition. The goal was to reconstruct the layers of rock beneath the Moai and determine whether geological changes were responsible for the small movements. The team brought equipment to the island in late summer, but when the project was announced, several Rapa Nui elders gathered at the main site, warning them not to dig too deep. One old man told them in quiet Spanish that the Moai do not guard the land. They keep it sealed. The researchers thanked him politely and continued their preparations. When the scanners were finally switched on, a deep mechanical hum rolled out from the equipment and spread across the field. The vibration came from the ground transmitters that the team had placed around several of the statues. As the radar waves pulsed into the soil, fine layers of loose dirt and sand began to settle around the bases. From a distance, it looked as though one of the Moai had tilted slightly forward, but it was only the soil shifting in response to the machines. The local workers exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them backed away from the site, whispering to one another. To them, this settling of the ground confirmed what their elders had warned, that disturbing the Moai would awaken something beneath. The scientists tried to calm them, explaining that the vibrations were harmless and that the statues had not moved. Yet even among the researchers, the air felt tense. Inside the control tent, the monitors flickered as the first readings appeared. The team waited as the AI began to translate the radar data into images. For a long moment, the screens showed only blurred lines and shifting colors. Then, slowly, the program started to outline shapes beneath the rocks that didn't match the geological models they had expected to see. One of the technicians leaned forward, frowning at the pattern that appeared on the display. "There's something down there," he said quietly. Before anyone understood what the machines had seen, they needed to remember what the island had already lost, the civilization that built these giants and the warning it left behind. A civilization lost in silence. When Jacob Roggeveen's ship appeared on the horizon in April of 1722, the people of Easter Island had already fallen into ruin. Roggeveen was a Dutch explorer and navigator who had been sent by the Dutch West India Company to search for the fabled southern continent, a rich and undiscovered land many believed lay somewhere in the Pacific. His voyage was meant to expand trade routes and claim new territories for the Netherlands. Instead, he stumbled upon one of the loneliest islands on Earth. The Dutch sailors expected to find an untouched paradise, but what they saw instead was a dying world. The Moai statues that once stood as proud monuments were half buried and weathered by centuries of neglect. Many were lying face down, and others stood only to their shoulders. From a distance, the figures appeared to be only giant heads rising from the ground. The island around them was stripped bare of trees, its slopes scarred by erosion, and the people who approached the strangers from the sea were thin, exhausted, and wary. The Europeans could not understand how a society capable of shaping such massive stone figures now struggled to survive on a land that looked dead. To them, the statues seemed like relics from an age that had no connection to the frail survivors standing before them. What Roggeveen had witnessed was not the beginning of collapse, it was the aftermath. Centuries earlier, the Rapa Nui had created one of the most remarkable cultures in the Pacific. Around 1200 CE, Polynesian settlers arrived on this isolated patch of volcanic rock and turned it into a thriving civilization. They brought crops like sweet potatoes and taro, and they domesticated chickens for food. They built stone houses and ceremonial platforms called ahu, where the Moai would eventually stand. Each clan carved its own statues, competing to make them taller and more impressive than those of rival groups. For generations, this fragile balance between people and nature held. The Rapa Nui lived in harmony with their land, guided by rituals that honored their ancestors. That balance did not last. As the population grew, the demand for resources became impossible to meet. Trees were cut down faster than they could grow back. Without forests, the soil began to erode. Crops failed. The islanders could no longer build large canoes to fish beyond the reefs, so they turned on each other. Oral histories tell of bitter wars between clans, where enemy Moai were toppled as symbols of revenge. Destroying a rival's statue was seen as destroying the power of their ancestors. Across the island, the once proud monuments fell face down, their heads buried in the dust. So, when Roggeveen stepped ashore, he found only fragments of that past greatness. The Rapa Nui now lived in small groups among the wreckage of their temples, surviving on what little crops and fish remained. The Dutch explorers stayed for only a few days, but their arrival marked the beginning of another tragedy, the one brought by outsiders. In the following centuries, the island suffered even more devastation. In the 1860s, slave ships from Peru raided Easter Island, capturing hundreds of men, women, and children to work in mines and plantations. Most never returned. The few who did brought with them deadly diseases that swept through the survivors. Smallpox, tuberculosis, and leprosy killed almost everyone who remained. By the time Chile annexed the island in 1888, fewer than 150 Rapa Nui were left alive. Entire family lines had vanished. Their oral traditions nearly disappeared with them. By the late 19th century, Easter Island had become a ghost of what it once was. The Moai stood abandoned, their stone faces worn by centuries of wind and salt. The Rapa Nui people who had carved them were gone, and most of their history had vanished with them. When explorers and scientists finally returned, they were met with no written records, no clear answers, only hundreds of towering statues staring inland. That silence invited questions. People around the world began to speculate about who built the Moai and what they meant. In the absence of real answers, the world began to invent its own. Theories, myths, and wild speculations. Among the Rapa Nui themselves, the old beliefs had never entirely disappeared. According to oral tradition, the Moai were not just stone figures, but sacred vessels filled with mana, a spiritual force believed to connect the living and the dead. Each statue represented a deified ancestor whose power continued to protect the clan. High priests and chiefs claimed they could channel this energy through ritual chants and offerings. Some legends went even further. They said the Moai moved on their own, walking to their resting places through the strength of mana. For generations, children grew up hearing that the statues had once been alive, walking across the island to stand watch over their people. When Europeans heard these stories, they dismissed them as superstition. They could not imagine that a small, isolated island society had carved and transported hundreds of stone figures without modern cranes or machinery. Early archaeologists assumed that the Rapa Nui were merely caretakers of monuments built by an older and more advanced race. By the mid-20th century, the theories had taken on new and stranger forms. In 1968, a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods, a book that claimed extraterrestrials had visited Earth in ancient times. He argued that the Moai were messages or landing markers built with alien technology. Other fringe researchers pushed different ideas. They claimed that Easter Island was the last surviving fragment of Atlantis or Lemuria, mythical continents swallowed by the sea. They pointed to the statues' oversized heads as evidence that they were modeled after beings who were not quite human. But the strangest and most secretive stories came from the few remaining Rapa Nui elders. Some spoke of sacred areas that no outsider should enter, and caves said to contain forbidden relics from before the Great Collapse. They described tunnels sealed with stones, said to be resting places for spirits that must never be disturbed. One account mentioned a chamber beneath the mountain quarry where the first Moai were carved, a place where the oldest faces sleep. These stories were rarely told to foreigners, but whispers of them eventually reached archaeologists and journalists. Most ignored them as myth, but a few wondered if the legends were memories of real events, distorted by centuries of loss. Before artificial intelligence ever scanned the island, modern archaeology began to uncover parts of the truth. Rediscovery and the secrets beneath. In the early 1950s, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl arrived on Easter Island with a team of archaeologists and local workers. Heyerdahl was already a global celebrity for his Kon-Tiki expedition, in which he sailed a handmade raft across the Pacific to prove that ancient peoples could have traveled vast distances. His next question was just as bold. Who built the Moai, and how? At the time, the world still believed that the statues were only heads rising from the ground, but Heyerdahl wanted proof. His team began digging around several half-buried Moai at the Rano Raraku quarry, the volcanic crater where most of the statues were carved. The work was slow and heavy, but the results were astonishing. The statues were not heads at all. Beneath the soil, they had complete bodies, long torsos, arms folded over their stomachs, and intricate carvings etched across their backs. Some of the carvings showed symbols and tool patterns that no one had ever documented before. The finding overturned everything the world thought it knew about Easter Island. The idea that the Rapa Nui had deliberately hidden them was replaced with a more human truth. Nature itself had erased its own history, layer by layer. 3 decades later, the torch passed to Joanne Van Tilburg, an American archaeologist who brought new rigor to the island's study. In the 1980s, she launched the Easter Island Statue Project, which became the first comprehensive effort to catalog every known Moai and its platform, or Ahu. Using careful excavation and precise mapping, Van Tilburg's team revealed that the statues were part of a massive, coordinated building program that spanned generations. Her excavations uncovered tool marks, pigments, and architectural details, showing that the Rapa Nui had a structured workforce and advanced planning. Some pigments suggested that the statues were once painted in vivid colors for ceremonies. Stone chips found in trenches proved that many statues had been reworked multiple times, hinting at evolving spiritual and political meanings. By the early 2000s, new technology made it possible to study the island without disturbing it. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic sensors were used to look beneath the surface, mapping layers of rock and soil around the main Moai sites. The scans revealed dense pockets, hollow areas, and uneven layering beneath the platforms. Scientists disagreed about what these anomalies meant. Some believed they were old quarries filled with debris. Others thought they might be collapsed caves or ceremonial pits. Whatever the cause, the data hinted that the ground below the statues was far from ordinary. Public curiosity exploded again. Documentaries, books, and online debates mixed real science with imagination, reviving questions that had never been answered. Were these underground shapes natural, or had the Rapa Nui deliberately built something beneath their monuments? The calls grew louder for a complete, high-resolution map of the entire island. a final project that could show everything hidden below. The technology to do it would come years later. The next team to arrive would bring machines capable of reading through solid rock and interpreting patterns no human could see. The hidden network beneath the Moai. After confirming that the statues had not moved, the 2023 research team decided to continue their scans to understand the irregular readings recorded in the first round of data. The AI system began a second sweep, releasing thousands of low-frequency pulses through the soil. The technique was non-invasive, but on an island as eroded as Easter, even gentle vibrations could disturb the ground. The first images looked ordinary. The sensors showed dense volcanic rock, layers of compacted sediment, and clusters of ancient lava tubes left by the island's 3 extinct volcanoes. Everyone expected that, but as the AI processed the deeper layers, something unexpected appeared. Beneath several of the main Moai platforms were repeating voids that formed smooth arcs and long, straight alignments. The shapes were too even to be random. When the program connected the points, a picture emerged of a network that seemed to run under several ceremonial sites. At first, the geologists assumed the AI was misinterpreting the reflections. Lava tubes can sometimes branch in patterns that appear geometric when molten rock cools unevenly. But when the digital map was compared with archaeological surveys, the team saw that the tunnels followed almost the same layout as the largest ahu, the raised stone platforms where the Moai stand. The match was close enough to make coincidence hard to defend. The team lowered the power of the transmitters to avoid interference, but new data began to appear on the sensors. Around 2 of the test platforms, the soil had settled by a few centimeters. No one had touched the surface, yet the vibrations had clearly loosened pockets of soft earth. The change was minor, but it was a reminder that the land was fragile. Easter Island's thin volcanic topsoil had always been vulnerable to erosion. The scientists quickly switched the equipment to a gentler setting. When they reviewed the recordings from before the adjustment, another anomaly appeared. The radar reflections from the deepest cavities behaved differently from those near the surface. Instead of echoing cleanly, the signals scattered as though hitting layers of material with different densities. The AI's density map suggested that some of the walls had been hardened or reshaped by water movement, yet mixed within the image were straight bands that did not resemble any known natural process. To test the possibility of human involvement, the researchers overlaid the AI model with past climate and hydrological studies. The cavities followed the same routes as ancient freshwater springs and catchments that earlier studies had linked to the island's old farming areas. These were places where the Rapa Nui had once planted sweet potatoes and taro, using every remaining patch of fertile ground. That single insight changed the entire meaning of the project. The Rapa Nui had not simply watched their island die, they had fought to keep it alive. The Moai, placed above those cavities, might have been built to mark or protect the last functioning parts of that system. What had once looked like religious devotion now looked like engineering born of desperation. The scientists expanded their scans to other sites. The pattern repeated. Under each major platform were traces of the same shaped voids. The interconnected paths looked like veins running through the island's body. The team realized they were seeing what could be the remnants of an ancient water management network, built at the end of the civilization's life to hold the soil together and keep the island's last springs from draining away. As they studied the image, a new vibration rippled through the ground. It was soft and rhythmic, not like an earthquake, but more like resonance. The pulse matched the scanner's frequency. Monitors flickered, and the lead geologist quickly shut down the transmitters. The hum stopped, and silence returned. A silence heavy enough that no one wanted to move. The team understood immediately what had happened. Their pulses had disturbed the same delicate soil systems that the Rapa Nui had once struggled to preserve. The small collapses recorded by the sensors echoed the erosion patterns visible in the buried layers. With modern equipment, they had repeated the very act that had undone the island before. They had shaken an exhausted land. When the AI finished its computation, the final model appeared on the main screen. It displayed not only the cavities, but also new distortions in soil density created during the scan. Red zones glowed where the ground had just shifted. Every one of those areas matched places that geological cores identified as failure zones from centuries earlier. Even gentle vibration was enough to accelerate decay. The meaning became painfully clear. The Rapa Nui had chosen these exact spots for their Moai because they had known the island's weaknesses. Each statue stood on a platform that covered or reinforced unstable ground. The weight helped compress the soil and hold the surface together. The platforms were designed to divert rainwater and protect what little fertility remained. The people had built their monuments not as gestures of pride, but as acts of preservation. But those efforts had come at a devastating cost. To carve and move hundreds of massive statues, they had cut down the forests that bound the soil. The trees provided the logs, ropes, and sledges needed to transport stone from the quarry to the coast. Once the forests were gone, the earth lost its anchor. Rain stripped away the topsoil. The land dried and cracked, and crops that had once grown easily began to fail. Birds that had nested in the trees vanished, taking with them an essential source of fertilizer and food. As the ecosystem collapsed, so did the society. In trying to save their island, the Rapa Nui had accelerated its death. The scientists looked at the AI's glowing map and saw a perfect record of that paradox. The Moai were both symbols of devotion and instruments of destruction. They were humanity's oldest mirror, the proof that even intelligence and faith cannot always overcome environmental limits. One of the archaeologists broke the silence. "We're doing to them what they did to themselves," she said quietly. No one disagreed. The team had come only to verify a small mystery about shifting statues. Instead, they had discovered that the ground beneath them was still unstable, and that their own scanning had worsened it. The AI's imagery revealed more than geology. It exposed a warning encoded in stone by the people who had once stood on the same soil. The Rapa Nui had understood that when a society takes more from the earth than it returns, the ground itself becomes the instrument of collapse. When the scientists compared the island's ancient sediment data with modern environmental records, the parallel was undeniable. The same pattern is spreading across the planet. Forests that once absorbed carbon and anchored soil are being cleared in the Amazon and Indonesia. Rivers that once fed millions are shrinking in Africa and Asia. Farmlands in South America and the Middle East are turning saline as irrigation water evaporates faster than it can be replaced. Coastal regions that sustained civilizations for thousands of years are slipping under rising seas. The Moai had watched over one civilization that destroyed itself through ambition and necessity. Now they watch another. The terror was not in what the scientists had found beneath the statues. It was in recognizing that the end that consumed a single island in the Pacific is now unfolding across the entire Earth. What do you think about the Moai statues? Comment down below.